Syria is back in the Arab League. During a special meeting held in Cairo on May the 7th, foreign ministers from 13 Arab League member states agreed to reinstate Syria's membership after a suspension of over 10 years. This means that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad will be able to sit with his counterparts at the upcoming Arab League summit after a decade-long absence. So far, reactions to the story have been mixed. While the United Nations expressed hopes that the return will help end the war in Syria, some regional countries are not yet on board with the about turn. The reactions from major countries are also starkly different. So what does getting back to the Arab League mean to both sides? Is this part of a bigger trend of détente in the region? What does it mean for the world at large? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Xi'an, northwest China, by Professor Wang from the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies of China's Northwest University. From Beijing by Hussein Askary, Southwest Asia Coordinator at the Schiller Institute, and from Brisbane, Australia, by Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So, foreign ministers issued a statement at the meeting vowing to preserving Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, stability and regional integrity based on the Arab League Charter and its principles. Professor Wang, what does this story, what does this announcement mean, and how significant is it?
Of course, the statement is very important, with a very, very strong sense. On the one hand, it suggests that the Arab League and all the Arab states, their willingness to preserve the independence, sovereignty, and integral territory of Syria, because after war, more than a decade long of the Syrian civil war, a lot of external powers intervention are there, and a lot of debates about what might be the future direction for the Syrian reconstruction should be. So this statement comes from the Arab world, and the Arab League stresses the voice that all the Arab states, they hope that the Syrian reconstruction could be based upon the precondition that the Syrian sovereignty should be respected and the Syrian territorial integrity should be preserved. So it shows that the Arab League and the Arab states, their willingness to help the Syrian people to reconstruct their country and to encourage the future normalized ties between different Arab states with Syrian government based upon the mutual respect and equality. So I believe this is a very, very important statement.
Okay.
And the meeting, of course, is also very important.
Yeah. Mr. Askary, how do you read the announcement and the significance of it? And also, what does it mean to the president, to the government led by Mr. Bashar al-Assad?
Well, this is a very significant decision, which is a bit overdue, but it's coming in the right time, because it's part of the new paradigm shift, which we have seen in the international relations, especially in this region, after the China brokered Iran-Saudi Arabia renormalization of relations, which has implications for the whole region. So this is also signifies the end of 12 years of the terrible regime change process, which started in Libya and then Egypt, Syria, which were not civil wars, but these were foreign directed operations to change the governments and the structures of governments in this whole region. So this was a terrible era, which hopefully now is ending. Hopefully for good.
Okay. Professor Powell, what is your take? How do you look at the significance of this development and the significance or the implicit message about the legitimacy or the status of the Syrian government led by Mr. Bashar al-Assad?
It's a very significant development because it points directly to a change in paradigm. For more than a decade, the region has suffered from external forces seeking to reshape the configuration of powers within the region. And now what we're starting to see is the emergence of a new set of arrangements based on a recognition that the security of one cannot come at the expense of the security of all, and that in fact the security and prosperity of all nations in the region are intertwined with each other. It's a very important first step on this long journey forward.
Professor Wang, is this part of a bigger trend of détente of relations in the region? And what do you think is driving the normalization of relations with the president led by Bashar al-Assad? Because as many of our guests mentioned, we have just seen the normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Right now, this is also happening. Is there continuity between these events?
Of course, there was strong connections between the Syrian problems and as well as the trend of the Middle East peace process. Because what we are talking about is not only the Syria problem. When we're talking about the situation inside Syria, we have to also understand the dynamics and the latest developments in all across this region, because the Syrian problem has already become an important topic, not only for Syrian people themselves, but also for all the Middle Eastern states, because some of the states, they get involved very deeply into this country. So if their relations cannot be normalized, if their bilateral relations or multilateral relations cannot be improved, the Syrian problem could not be settled so easily. So as you mentioned, that the normalized relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, they paved a very, very important foundation for the improvement of peaceful opportunities, not only for Syria, but also we look at for Yemen, but also maybe for the internal dialogue for Lebanon, for Iraq. So this is very, very important, the beginning, the precondition. And also it suggested that the Middle Eastern countries and Middle Eastern people, they are tired of wars and conflicts and competition rivalries. They hope to find opportunities to realize peace process, to find their solutions to end the crisis. So it suggested a new beginning.
Right, Mr. Askary, I mean, many talked about the role of China in facilitating or brokering or mediating between these two sides. But what are really the multiple factors that have been driving the situation till this point? I'm sure it's not just China, but there are other aspects as well that have been developing on the ground that are pushing towards a certain direction that we're seeing.
Yes, as I said in the beginning, we have had this series of wars and destabilization operations called as the Arab Spring or the regime change policies, and all these have basically failed, and also showed all the people in the region, but also around the world, that this is a disaster. It has caused enormous suffering for the people of Syria, of all these other nations, Libya, Yemen, and also massive waves of refugees also affecting Europe. So all these factors that you cannot use military force or militant groups and terrorist groups to shape new governments out of nothing. And this is the trend which we have seen before, and now it's being replaced because the peoples of this region also are tired of this whole process. Remember, we have had wars in this region. For example, Iraq since 1991, we have had the Desert Storm, we had the invasion of Iraq 2003, and all these other operations. So the whole region, and now even the governments are realizing that even the ones who were part of this destabilization process, that they are being exhausted, their resources are being exhausted, their future is being forfeited, and now it's time to reconsider all these policies. And as President Xi said, that, this region should be owned by the people of the region. And therefore, governments now in the Arab world are orienting towards the question of reconstruction. As Professor Wang said, this is very, very key now, because for these nations to become stable, you cannot start with only political change. You need to start with economic change. And this change is taking place now. Of course, China has been leading with the Belt and Road Initiative, but these nations are finding out that their resources should be better used in building the future of their nations and making the population in their countries and within their borders satisfied, and build infrastructure, build water. We have huge water problems in the region. We need to produce food, and so on and so forth, so you can secure the future. And this could be done individually by each nation, but also collectively as Arab nations and also the whole region of West Asia.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Powell, Professor Powell, how exactly will that be done? Because the war has not ended in Syria. How will the reinstatement of Syria's membership in the Arab League specifically contribute to the efforts to start reconstructing the country?
I think the first thing is that it means that the country is no longer as isolated within the region as it once was. And as we know, successful economic reconstruction and development actually requires the interaction with neighbouring countries so that resources can be pooled and optimised. So this is a very important first step to be able to bring nations together again around common interests, as opposed to trying to divide nations and regions around conflicting ideas. So that's the first step. So it's laying the foundations for a common economic development vision where we can, in a sense, manage differences of opinion on the basis of common economic development imperatives. So politics and economics must come together to create that stable environment and the right conditions to harness the resources, as Mr. Askary said, to be committed to peaceful economic redevelopment as opposed to continuation of warfare and destruction.
Right now, how united is the Arab League on this issue? Because we have 13 member states, foreign minister attending this special meeting in Cairo, as I mentioned. But there are also countries who still seem to have reservations about the situation. For instance, Qatar, Kuwait have expressed their opposition to Mr. Assad's presence at the upcoming Arab League summit. Qatar said it supports whatever achieves Arab consensus, but its official stance on normalizing ties with Syria does not change. Professor Wang, how should we interpret this? Is this going to be a divisive issue, or is it just a matter of time?
I think it suggests a very complexity of Syrian problem, because on the one hand, we have to understand that this agreement to readmit Syria's membership in the Arab League could not be realized without the consensus of all the members of the Arab League. So when every Arab League members, every Arab states, we hope to support this kind of the resolution, this can be effective. So even there were some kind of reservations, but this reservation does not become the obstacles for the Syrian government to go back to the Arab League. So it's very, very meaningful and very, very important. But on the other hand, we also have to understand there was still some kind of the reasons behind this kind of the reservations from Qatar and from Kuwait, for example, because for Qatar it is a little bit complicating because Qatar supported the Muslim Brotherhood and the opposition groups in Syria. So Qatar was the first country who hosted the embassy from the Syrian opposition groups. So it is very difficult for them to change their attitude fundamentally within a very short term. And also similar to Qatar, but different, a little bit different, is that the Kuwait's stance are still largely influenced by its internal politics, because Qatar, because inside Kuwait, the parliament role is very important, and inside the parliament, the Sunni blocs with the sympathies to the opposition groups in Syria are still very influential. So they are not able to change their attitudes towards the Syrian government within the short term. So, but again, although some of the states and other Arab states, they still had reservations about the normalized ties with Syrian government, but their agreement upon the readmission of Syrian government going back to Arab League suggested a unity. This unity, I think, in the future will grow and also will become more and more stronger and will become the major motivation for further peace process in the Middle East.
We're going to take a very short break and we'll be right back after that. We have been talking about Syria's readmission to the Arab League after a decade-long absence. Stay with us. Now let's take a look at reactions from major countries around the world. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Wang Wenbin said at a regular press briefing that China has always supported Arab states in seeking strength through unity and actively supported supported Syria in returning to the Arab League. China has actively engaged actually with various parties through our own channels. Some of the examples, for instance, last month China's Special Envoy Zhang Jun visited Syria, and China also sent a task force to relevant Arab states to discuss the issue, and it's expected that senior Syrian representatives will be visiting China as well. So, Professor Wang, staying with you, why has China been so active in seeking Syria's return to the Arab League?
Syrian problem.
Yes.
Yes, because on the one hand, China is a very, very important contributor to the process of peace in the Middle East, and China is willing to witness and also willing to offer help to the more and more normalized ties between different Middle Eastern countries and the further peace process for the Middle Eastern countries. And we have also to know that the Syrian problem itself is also very important, because according to some description, Syrian conflict and Syrian crisis is and was the very, very center of the Middle Eastern crisis. So when the Syrian problem, especially Syrian government, going back to the Arab League, it suggests that uncertainties, the challenges, and the crisis in the Middle Eastern states are decreased, and the confidence of future peace for the Middle Eastern states are enhanced and strengthened. So that is why China is willing to witness this process happening, and also China is willing to provide further help to facilitate the process of going to peace and more stable Middle Eastern order.
Mr. Askary, how do you look at the role China has been playing in the whole matter, and why China is so active in seeing that Syria is admitted back in the Arab League?
Yeah, I think it was very, very important that the decision by the Arab League from the beginning was a grave mistake. It was done at the behest of Washington and London, actually, and Qatar played a key role as chairman of the Arab League at the time to implement that decision. What China did, remember, China vetoed multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions tending to use similar methods against Syria, to isolate Syria and delegitimize the Syrian government. And that was a very, very important stance, which also Russia backed that. So China made it clear that you cannot make such mistakes. You don't, at your whims, because you just don't like a government, you can take away legitimacy from them. And you make that part of international governance. That was very, very important to preserve the sovereignty and independence and the territorial integrity of Syria was of extreme importance for China, which did not want to create a precedent, as the Arab League have done. But fortunately, in the United Nations Security Council, Syria, the government in Damascus, the government of President Bashar Assad, who was, by the way, elected by the people, that it kept its seat in the United Nations and in the United Nations Security Council. So this was very, very important in terms of China's view of international governance, that they should adhere to the principles of the United Nations Charter. And if you start playing with that because you like this government or dislike that government, then you create a chaotic situation in the world. So that's, I think, one of the most important features of China's policy towards Syria.
Professor Powell, what is your take, especially against the backdrop of the opposition that has been voiced by countries such as the United States and UK to Syria's return to the Arab League? First, let's listen to, for instance, what the US State Department Deputy Spokesperson Adjunct Patel had to say at a recent press briefing.
Syria does not merit readmission into the Arab League, and we continue to believe that we will not normalize our relations with the Assad regimes, and we don't support our allies and partners doing so either.
So, Professor Powell, how do you interpret America's stance?
Look, as Mr. Askary mentioned, the problems in this region have, in large part, had been the result of US involvement indirectly and directly, and this has been going on for over 2 decades. The reality is that regional instability has been a consequence of an attempt by an American neocon vision to reshape the region in a way that suits the interests of one particular group of countries in the world over others. what's happening is that a new paradigm is starting to emerge. And that new paradigm, in many respects, is an old one. It's one that draws on the traditions of Westphalia, which actually recognises that no single country can have its way with everyone else, and that we have to, on this one planet, work out ways in which we can coexist peacefully and with prosperity, notwithstanding differences that we might have. And so what we're starting to, again, to see emerging in this region is a recognition that the paradigm that emphasises difference and conflict is actually destructive and counterproductive to the welfare of the people of different countries. It hasn't worked, and new ways and better ways are possible, and this is exactly what we're starting to see now.
Well, at this moment, from the United States perspective, actually we can see that the United States is actually opposed to Arab League's majority decision. Or let me put it the other way, the Arab League has defied what the U.S. believes to adopt a decision that the United States doesn't really like. Professor Wang, how do you look at that? I mean, the United States and the Arab League seem to be not on the same page on this issue.
I think on the one hand, it suggests that the United States powerless over the situation, the transformation inside the Middle East. And on the other hand, it suggests the growing aspiration of independence for the regional countries. Because traditionally, United States' role in the Middle East are very, very dominant, and to some extent, very, very directive. United States' voice should be obeyed and should be observed by all the Middle Eastern countries from the United States' own understandings. And the United States is able to and was able to influence the regional countries' behaviors according to United States' own understanding and own standards. So that created a lot of crisis, that created a lot of the confrontation and hatred in this region. But with time goes by, what we are witnessing is the realization of the Middle Eastern countries, their own willingness and aspirations for more independent foreign policies and internal policies, and their willingness to strengthen their own voices in the region. So that's why what we are looking at is a special meeting for the Arab League. But what we can also witness the last year, especially in the second half of last year, when the United States pressure failed to transform the Saudi Arabia's oil policy and energy policy. This is kind of the chains of events. So it all suggests the United States powerless and also the growing Middle Eastern countries' aspiration for independence policies.
Mr. Askary, is it going to be so easy, so simple? I mean, look, the United States has renewed sanctions against Syria for another year, and the Middle East is not peaceful. We are seeing the flaring up of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in recent days. So what do you expect to happen in the near future?
Yeah, well, first of all, concerning the previous question about the Biden administration voicing displeasure with the decision of the Arab League, it reminds me of the legendary King Canute, who stood at the sea and screaming at the wind to stop the wind from blowing. That thing is not going to happen because the world has changed, and the United States, whether it likes something or does not like, does not really determine the issue. The main reason there is instability in Syria, for example, right now, is that you have American boots on the ground and we are not allowing a diplomatic solution for the crisis. They are also continue to support militant groups and preventing normalization between Syria and Turkey, because on the border between Syria and Turkey, there are groups that are supported by the United States. And if that is settled, you will have a more stable situation to resolve the rest of the issues.
Is that not in the interest of the United States for the region to be peaceful and quiet?
Well, if we think in natural terms, it would be very important. It's very good for the United States if there is peace and stability in this region, because it's of vital interest, as the United States says, for its interest. So it would be better if this region is stable and prospering, and the United States could play a more positive role. This is something we have proposed in our reconstruction plan for Syria, where both the Syria itself, the regional powers, but also China and the United States and Europe can work together to reconstruct this whole region. There's a wrong view of what the United States considers as its interest. Right now, yes, the interest of the geopolitically minded people who have this hegemonic idea, they think this is not in their interest. But for the interest of the American nation, for the European nations, it's better to heed what the decision of the Arab League, support China's initiatives in the region, and start a reconstruction process. Because that, as Professor Wang and Dr. Powell said, the reconstruction issue is the most important, economic development. And this is part of the Operation Phoenix, the plan for reconstruction we in the Schiller Institute presented several years ago. That would be the basis for achieving peace and stability. It will benefit Europe, it will benefit the United States at the end.
Professor Powell, how do you look at the challenges the region will continue to face as the United States appear to be clinging on to its influence in the region, while obviously things are getting a little bit out of control for the United States?
Look, I think the first thing that we'll need to face up to is the fact that the United States still has armed forces on the ground. And I think that over the next few years, and it might take some time, there will be growing pressure for that presence to go. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is a recalibration domestically within the United States around what it understands to be in its interests and also in the interests of the globe. The fact is that the last 20 years has seen the preponderance of the interests of the neocon framework, which has sought to achieve a sense of political hegemony across the globe post the demise of the Soviet Union. That has failed. And the events in the Middle East over the last couple of months demonstrates that that agenda has not worked. New ways are needed, and new ways are needed not only for the region, but also at a global level. And this is actually the critical lesson, I think, for both the United States and the other major Western powers who have historically...
Do people have an idea what kind of new ways that may work, Professor Powell? That's the problem, right? You know the old one doesn't work, but what will work? And keep it short, please. 20 seconds, please. Yeah.
Well, the new ways has to be based on finding common interests as the foundation stones of cooperation, respecting each other's differences at the same time. Find those common interests, work together to build economic welfare for people, and you will get the kind of stability that we all seek.
All right, we have to leave it there. Extremely important topics, but many thanks to the valuable insights shared by our three guests. Professor Wang joining us from Northwest China's Xi'an, from the Middle Eastern Studies Institute of Northwest University of China. Hussein Askary joining us from Beijing. He is Southwest Asia Coordinator of Schiller Institute. Professor Warwick Powell, adjunct professor from Queensland University of Technology. Many thanks to all of you. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.